If you've been following me on Twitter, then you probably noticed that my experience with the Fruits Basket remake has been less than positive. So imagine my shock when episodes 16 and 17 just completely blew everything that had come before out of the water, like someone had finally breathed life into this husk of a show. But why is that exactly? What is it that elevates these two episodes so far above the rest of the series in terms of emotional satisfaction? One of the most striking structural differences is that most of the events of these episodes are actually shown to us rather than just told to us. As much as I appreciate the thematic ideas Fruits Basket tries to implement, its execution of said ideas is far from captivating. The majority of the big emotional moments in this anime consist of Toru listening to other characters explain their tragic backstories, and then she either gives them advice or just acknowledges their feelings and helps them move forward. Most of these moments only contain a few short flashbacks to convey the most important ideas, like Hatsuharu first meeting Yuki or Momiji's mom trying to kill herself. So taking a full episode and a half on just Arisa's backstory is a huge change of pace. The more discussion-based approach isn't an inherently bad concept, and sometimes it does manage to pull off something emotionally satisfying, like with Hattori. I also didn't mind it at all in the original series, but that's for a completely different reason that we'll get into later. However, most of these scenes are merely functional. The characters dole out their histories, Toru starts crying and says something emotionally poignant, and then they either try to move forward, or if they've already moved forward, continue on with their lives. Functional in theory, but when you get to the fifth person in a row to do this, it gets a bit repetitive and the story beats that are supposed to feel emotional or moving end up coming across as mechanical. Most of these discussions also tend to be extremely long-winded and end up repeating the same points several times in the same monologue. Even for as strong as episode 5's emotional moment was, it wore out its welcome by a solid 2 or 3 minutes as characters continued to drone on about the same things over and over again. Episodes 16 and 17 take a slightly different approach, but they still follow the most basic blueprint for how Fruits Basket's characters are written. In episode 18, Yuki states that, contrary to the advice Kisa's teacher gives her about looking inside herself to find something worth loving, it's only through finding someone else who can love you that you can learn to love yourself. Whether you agree with that incredibly loaded statement is another matter entirely, but this is basically the entire thematic point of Fruits Basket wrapped up in a single quote. It's only through other people, mainly Toru, finding the good points in these characters that they are able to move past their shortcomings and start to love themselves. Back to 16 and 17, it's through meeting Toru's mother, Kyoko, and being around the two of them in a more homey and comforting atmosphere that Arisa is able to look inward and dream of a more positive life for herself than a delinquent who spends her nights beating the shit out of people and then comes home to a despondent alcoholic father. However, the change that arises in her doesn't come from an exhaustive speech from Toru about how Arisa is actually a good girl deep inside. Instead, the change happens gradually through repeated interactions with Toru and Kyoko. At first she seems to hate them and finds the vibe they exude suffocating, but as she is continuously exposed to their kindness, she starts to grow fond of that vibe and begins to want more of it. This leads her to actually act on her situation and try to get out of the gang she's a member of, instead of just changing her mind about how she looks at the world because someone gave her a pep talk. I suppose it's kind of a disservice to the rest of the cast to say that they don't do anything to get out of their situations, but it's hard to deny that there's a massive gap in emotional stakes between I stopped thinking mean things about this person and I tried to leave my gang so they beat the shit out of me and the only reason I got out alive was because my idol came to my rescue despite me acting like a spoiled brat towards her. This is also one of the few moments where someone actually does act physically to help someone out of their situation. I don't necessarily think that a physical statement is superior to a verbal one, and I do think this situation is much more complex than just saying something like show don't tell, but it is definitely a more visceral experience and helps to break up the monotony of Fruits Basket's storytelling. As Arisa is beaten up by her gang for trying to leave, we see Kyoko arrive as Arisa is passing out from the pain. When she comes to, Kyoko is carrying her home, and we see that she has several marks on her face that weren't there when she showed up to save Arisa, meaning that she had to fight her way through the gang to save her. The fact that Arisa was able to stand up and say that she wanted to change her life for the better despite knowing the consequences she'd face was more than enough for Kyoko to support her in turning her life around. It's an incredibly powerful moment to punctuate the end of Arisa's character arc. Even the comedic present-day moments work well in furthering the themes of this particular arc. Normally, I find Fruits Basket's humor to be incredibly abrasive and unfunny, but having Arisa interact with a bunch of middle school gangster wannabes to show how much she has matured was a nice, lighthearted touch to balance out the more serious tone from the flashback sequences. It isn't just the narrative that makes these episodes stand out, though. 16 and 17 also happen to be far and away the best looking episodes of the series, with only episodes 22 and 24 coming anywhere close to matching them. Though this isn't exactly a huge feat because most of this remake kinda looks like a plate of hot ass. I don't know how beloved Fruits Basket is in Japan compared to its popularity in the US, but the fact that it even got a remake means that there's at least a decent portion of people who care deeply about this series. So to crank out such a soulless and artistically deprived remake that isn't even remotely as cinematically engaging as the original series after over 15 years of waiting feels kind of insulting. Once Arisa's flashback started, it was almost like I had wandered into an entirely different anime. The interplay of color, lighting, editing, and shot composition make these moments feel like they were crafted with care and thought put into them. The lighting and color in particular were my favorite aspects of the cinematography here. The cold blues and grays of Arisa's street life contrasted against the warm oranges and yellows of Toru's living room perfectly encapsulates the conflicting feelings that Arisa feels throughout this arc. It's not complex by any means, but at least it's trying, a far cry from what the rest of the series looks like. I also have a fondness for this shot of Kyoko and Toru positioning themselves between Arisa and a shadow in the other room, signifying how they are going to save Arisa from her dark situation, even if she doesn't want them to yet. To top it all off, the sound design is also significantly stronger in these episodes. Though this is one of the few areas that the remake is fairly strong at overall, these episodes take it to a whole other level, intensifying the feelings of depression, anxiety, and eventually comfort that Arisa goes through. And of course, you really can't go wrong with a Masaru Yokoyama soundtrack. Despite how much it feels like they just said, hey, you know how you did that amazing soundtrack for Your Lie in April? Yeah, just do that again. The one constant up until episode 16 was that Yokoyama's soundtrack was working way harder than any of the narrative or visual components. So for those elements to finally match the intensity of the soundtrack was hugely gratifying. To be honest, I'm really not sure why I stuck around through this whole first season, considering how incredibly mid it is, other than my nostalgic attachment to the original series, which still blows this new adaptation out of the water any day of the week, but I am happy that I got to experience these two episodes and the emotional expressiveness that they carry. Fruits Basket isn't supposed to be a cry porn kind of show, but it should at least be able to evoke a moderate amount of empathy and more complex emotionality from its audience, considering that its primary theme is so heavily emotion-driven. And at least a few of its episodes manage to do that, so I feel compelled to praise them. Was it worth slogging through some of the most uninteresting episodes of anime I've seen all year? Probably not. Am I going to continue this series in the hopes that it manages to do it again? Maybe, but I kinda doubt it. As for now, I'm just happy these episodes exist to remind me what this story is truly capable of. Special thanks to Jan Rogalski, Rourke Tanjoin, Christine Seibert, Call Me Catlord, Ryan Johnson, Eugenio Mendoza, and all my other patrons for their generous support. My name is Ember, and I'll see you next time.